Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Suruchi from SGPJ Lucknow. First of all, I would like to thanks the organizing team for giving me this opportunity to discuss this topic here. As in the previous lecture, we have already discussed a patient who is morbidly obese and is posted for laparoscopic cholecystectomy. We have discussed the pathophysiology and the preoperative concerns of that patient. I will be continuing with the intraoperative and the postoperative management of that patient. So, a patient who is morbidly obese and comes for a laparoscopic case, how do we proceed in such a case? First, coming to the challenges. Now, obesity per se uh, poses many challenges to the anesthetist as well as the surgeons as compared to their non-obese counterparts, and we need to have specific interventions to manage the perioperative complications in these patients. So, like first coming to the comorbidities, many of these patients have concomitant comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, ischemic heart disease, and even obstructive sleep apnea is very common. So, a proper history should be elicited, and we should be ready to manage these conditions if it is there in the patient. Difficult airway strategy should be planned because most of these patients might present with a difficult airway during mask ventilation or during induction or even during extubation. So you should be ready for that. Anesthesia drug doses is not as simple as in other cases because in these patients we calculate the drug doses as per their lean body weight or the adjusted body weight, which we'll be discussing in the forthcoming slides. Now, what is capnoperitoneum? Capnoperitoneum is the insufflation of carbon dioxide in the peritoneal cavity of the patient if laparoscopy surgery is carried out. So it has its own physiological side effects and it gets exaggerated in obese patients. This also we'll be discussing. It is advisable to extubate these patients in fully awake position so that you have this risk of desaturations are less. And post-operative pain management, mostly multimodal analgesia is preferred and it should be opioid free to decrease the chances of respiratory depressions. Early ambulation with DVT prophylaxis is very important because they are at an increased risk of venous thromboembolism. In this table, we have summarized the respiratory, the cardiovascular, the GI, and the neurological side effects of the capnoperitoneum. In respiratory, as we can see here, the airway pressures are increased, but the functional residual capacity and the pulmonary compliance are decreased, thus leading to an increased ventilation perfusion mismatch due to capnoperitoneum. What happens in obese patients, they already have an atelectatic lung with decreased pulmonary compliance and decreased FRC. So the situation gets accentuated because of the obesity as well as the capnoperitoneum. The respiratory is quite compromised in these patients, so we have to be careful. Same happens with the cardiovascular system. The venous return is decreased and the systemic vascular resistance is increased, thus decreasing the cardiac output. If the peritoneal stretch receptors are activated, these patients can have arrhythmias due to capnoperitoneum. Obese patients also, what happens is they may have hypertension, ischemic heart disease, and they are also more prone to arrhythmias because the sinoatrial node dysfunction and the fatty infiltration of conducting tissue makes them more prone for arrhythmia. So again, the cardiovascular system is already compromised in these patients, and capnoperitoneum leads to an increased compromise. In gastrointestinal, you can see that the risk of regurgitation is increased and intracranial pressure and cerebral perfusion pressures are also increased in these patients. So this chart will just show how this intra-abdominal pressure will affect the venous return and the SVR. So increased in the intra-abdominal pressure will lead to pooling of blood in the legs, IVC compression, and increased venous resistance. All these three will lead to a decreased venous return, while intra-abdominal pressure will also lead to increased intrathoracic pressure and may stimulate the peritoneal receptors, increases the vascular resistance of intra-abdominal organs. So all this will release the neurohormonal factors and will also lead to increased SVR. Both of these will combine and lead to decreased cardiac output and increase in the arterial pressures. It's not that laparoscopy surgery only has problems associated. We have actually many benefits of a laparoscopic surgery. And that is why patients and even surgeons prefer laparoscopy surgery. The wound is small, tissue trauma is very less, pain is less because the handling is less in these patients. This leads to less post-operative pulmonary complications. Post-operative ileus is less in these patients. Mobilization is early and shorter hospital stay and better cosmetic results. So it is actually a wise decision to go for laparoscopy surgery in these patients. Coming to the intraoperative preparation, what are the general concerns? First of all, we should try to encourage these patients to walk to the OT table themselves, because in this case particularly, the patient is posted for lap cholecystectomy, which is an elective procedure here. So you can always ask the patient to walk so that the trolley transfers can be reduced, which is quite cumbersome in these obese patients. And the patient can himself or herself go and position themselves on the operating table, so that will also decrease the chances of injury. The weight limits of the surgical table, trolleys, and the electrically operated equipment should be checked beforehand. And then inflatable hover mattress, that is a hover mat, can also be used if the patient is not ready to walk for lateral transfers. You should maintain patient's dignity by having suitably sized theater gowns and extra time and care for positioning these patients, because they are prone for nerve injuries, and increased number of OT personnel should be there. Experienced anesthetist and surgeon should be present inside the OT for these patients. You can see here the two OT tables are combined together. This will increase the width of the OT table as well as the capacity. The weight capacity has been increased. These are the, this is hover mat, which can be used for lateral transfers of the patient. This is another way of transferring the patient, taking him in this way. Generally, routine monitoring is only advised for these patients, but extra large cuff should be needed for NIBP measurements. Invasive arterial monitoring may be needed if the case demands so, or if you are not having a proper NIBP cuff, then you may go for invasive arterial monitoring. Central venous catheters are also needed only when you are not able to get the peripheral IV access. Otherwise, it's not needed mostly. Neuromuscular monitoring and BIS monitoring should be applied in these patients to have a proper recovery. You should be able to know that we are not giving extra drugs in these patients, because we want to have safe anesthesia profile. Blood sugar monitoring may be needed because most of these patients are diabetic. So if needed, you can have this blood sugar monitoring and warming devices to prevent hypothermia. Coming to this positioning, we'll be discussing in detail. This is ramped position for intubation. As you can see here, the patient is placed in a ramped position and strapped properly. Patient is very susceptible to brachial plexus, ulnar nerve, and sciatic neuropathies, and you have to protect the tissues which are susceptible to compression using soft foam and gel pads. Intravenous access, it's very prudent to have at least 2 IV lines while in the theater. And if at all the subcutaneous fat is not allowing you to visualize the veins, you can take help of the ultrasound. And central venous access should only be used if peripheral access is impossible or if specifically indicated, which is not needed in this case. Pre-oxygenation is always better to do in a 25 to 30 degree head-up position. That should be reverse Trendelenburg position. This will increase the end expiratory volume 2 folds as compared to the supine position. And a CPAP of 10 centimeters should be maintained. You can also use NIV mask to pre-oxygenate the patient. This will improve the functional residual capacity, which we have discussed before is already compromised in these patients, the pulmonary compliance and oxygenation status. The morbidly obese patient should be instructed to take deep vital capacity breaths. And apneic oxygenation should also be considered to extend the safe apnea period. Now, as we can see here, you can see this reverse Trendelenburg position will increase the safe apnea period significantly as compared to the supine position or just this head-up position. So this is the optimum position we need. This will improve the respiratory mechanics in these patients. Coming to induction and intubation, it is better to avoid long-acting opiates and benzodiazepines. Always go with shorter-acting agents. And those with a rapid offset like desflurane and remifentanil should be considered. The pharmacodynamic effect of anesthetic and analgesic agents is notoriously difficult to predict because of the fat and muscle mass in these patients, and drug dose calculation is more difficult in the morbidly obese. For that, we have this table. These drugs have to be given as per the lean body weight, while these drugs have to be calculated as per the adjusted body weight. So what is the definition of these? First, coming to total body weight, this is the actual weight of the patient, whether it is 100 kg, 120 kg, 140 kg, whatever is the total body weight. Then comes the ideal body weight. What the patient should weigh with a normal ratio of lean to fat mass is the ideal body weight. So generally it comes to height minus 105 centimeter in a female and 100 centimeters in males. Lean body weight, there are many complex formulas for that. This is the easiest one for men and for women. And regardless of the total body weight, the lean body weight will rarely exceed 100 kg in men and 70 in women. Adjusted body weight takes into account this fact that obese individuals have increased lean body mass and an increased volume of distribution for drugs. So it is calculated by adding 40% of the excess weight to the ideal body weight. Adjusted is ideal plus 0.4 of total body weight minus the ideal body weight. So here you can see, while induction and intubation, it's better to have this RAM position. That RAM position is to achieve this ear level with the sternal level. The tragus of the ear should be at the sternal angle level. This will reduce the risk of difficult laryngoscopy and improve the ventilation in these cases. So try to intubate in RAM position, minimize the induction to ventilation interval to avoid desaturation episodes. Use short-acting agents. Mostly rocuronium is used as a muscle relaxant in these patients. And lung recruitment after intubation is followed by sufficient PEEP even when the saturation is normal. So during induction, after intubation, and before extubation, it's better to go for lung recruitments. As we are suspecting a difficult airway in these patients, you should be prepared with the difficult airway cart. You should keep the bougies, the supraglottic airway, laryngoscope blades of different types, fiber optic scope, video laryngoscope, and you may have to consider awake intubation if you are thinking in terms of difficult mask ventilation or intubation. So this is the HELP position, that is head elevated laryngoscopy position. You can see the difference once the ramp is built and without ramp. So you can see the difference. This will help align the oropharyngeal laryngeal axis, which we talk for intubation. This should be the optimum position. Here you can see the tragus of the ear and the sternal angle is at the same level. So generally a sleep intubation is only practiced, but if needed, you may have to go for awake intubations. So laryngoscopy and intubation are often relatively straightforward. So after all these preparations, you might be encountering only Cormack-Lehen grade 1 once you go inside. So, but that should not allow you to forego these preparations. You should always do a ramp intubation. If at all the intubation becomes easy, that is well and good, but you should be prepared for difficult intubation. You can have difficulties during bag mask ventilation, and you can overcome either by a four-handed technique, that is two-person ventilation. One person is holding the mask, another one is ventilating, or with the use of a mechanical ventilator. You can put the patient on mechanical ventilator with the mask, and always keep oral airway. Maintenance of anesthesia is commenced promptly after induction of anesthesia with air and oxygen and the neuromuscular blocker of your choice. It is always advised to use short-acting opioids like remifentanil, or if you want to avoid opioids, you can go with dexmedetomidine infusion. Desflurane and sevoflurane are the volatile agents of choice because they have a faster onset and offset than isoflurane, and the airway reflexes are also have been seen to return faster with DES and SIVO. And airway reflexes return faster with DES as compared with SIVO. So DES is the agent of choice. These patients are at an increased risk of AGA. Now, what is AGA? That is accidental awareness of anesthesia under GA. So that we'll be discussing in the next slide. Dexmedetomidine may help minimize or eliminate the intraoperative use of opioids in the bariatric surgery, and it improves the safety profile in the postoperative period. So it is advisable to use dexmedetomidine in place of opioids in these cases. Use of short-acting anesthetic agents like remifentanil, SIVO, or desflurane will help to aid the rapid recovery from anesthesia and minimize postoperative hypoventilation and hypoxemia. Always remember that these patients mostly have obstructive sleep apnea history. So they have this chronic hypoxemia and hypercapnia building inside them. So we should not do any intervention which will increase the existing hypoxemia. You have to decrease the hypoxemia. What is accidental awareness under anesthesia? What happens? There is rapid redistribution of induction agents into the larger fat mass in these patients. So during induction, this is very common. it is always advised to have repeated doses of induction agents before intubation, or you have to supplement with a volatile anesthetic before going for intubation, because patients wake up more quickly than their non-obese counterparts after a single bolus dose of induction agent. The blood volume, cardiac output, renal perfusion, and glomerular infiltration increases, and liver function disorders may affect the metabolism of medication in these patients. Intraoperative ventilation, the strategies should be such to ensure normal capnia with the tidal volume and respiratory rate. You have to prevent hypercapnia and acidosis during pneumoperitoneum. Now, this happens with any pneumoperitoneum. The patient's CO2 will be increasing. So generally what we do is we decrease the tidal volume and increase the respiratory rate in any patient who's going for laparoscopy surgery. In these patients also, we have to do the same strategy. You have to have 6 to 10 ml per kg of tidal volume, but you have to calculate it with ideal body weight of the patient. Aim for a saturation more than 90%, 10 to 15 centimeters of PEEP can be used, and try to keep the pressures below 30 centimeters of water. Now, there have been few studies which have proved that equal ratio ventilation, that is I/E of 1:1, will improve the arterial oxygenation by increasing the PaO2, mean pressures, and dynamic compliance as compared to the conventional ratio of 1:2. So though there has been no superiority of pressure control over volume control ventilation, but the peak inspiratory pressures are lower when we are using PCV. So PCV is preferred most of the time, but no significant difference in terms of oxygenation or ventilation. But when you are using PCV with equal ratio ventilation, then it has been proven superior to volume control mode. And 7 to 8 seconds of recruitment maneuver after intubation and before extubation is recommended. The aim is to keep the alveolus and airways open in this patient. It is like they are more prone for atelectasis. They have already, atelectasis is already in their lungs, and this pneumoperitoneum will increase it more. Coming to emergence, the reversal of neuromuscular block should be guided by a nerve stimulator. The aim is to restore motor capacity before waking this patient. Patient should have return of their airway reflexes and breathing with good tidal volumes before tracheal extubation. Then only we have to reverse the neuromuscular block. In confirmed obstructive sleep apnea patients, you may insert a nasopharyngeal airway before waking. This will help mitigate the partial airway obstruction. Now, extubation, it is recommended that head should be again raised to 30 to 45 degrees before extubation, and it should be performed on fully awake patients. We want that the airway reflexes should be returned properly. Patient should be fully awake, obeying your commands, then only you go for extubation. If needed, you can apply CPAP during extubation and aspirate the nasogastric tube before extubating. Be prepared for desaturation episodes as per difficult airway society guidelines. So again, extubation should be done very carefully, and you should have all the instruments which you had kept during intubation and be prepared even during extubation. Immediately post extubation, you should take the patient to the post anesthesia care unit, and he should be managed in the sitting position or with a 45-degree head up tilt. Oxygen therapy should be applied to maintain the preoperative saturation, whatever it was, and continue oxygen therapy until the patient is mobile post-operatively. Watch for developing hypercapnia. They are very prone. One thing which we have to remember is if the patient was using CPAP therapy at home, this you have to elicit in the history, then it should be reinstated on return to the ward or even in the post-anesthesia unit if saturation levels are not maintained only with the inhaled oxygen. So you can see here the position of the patient during in the post-anesthesia unit, and supplemental oxygen pulse oximetry monitoring should always be applied. Opioid analgesics, if possible, try to avoid them because respiratory depressant effects occur. And pain management should be multimodal with paracetamol, NSAIDs, and you can have this liberal infiltration with the local anesthetics at the surgical site. And if at all you are using narcotics, you can use patient-controlled analgesia. Epidural anesthesia is also preferred, which is not required because this is not, in laparoscopy, you do not require it. It has been found that multimodal analgesia protocol will reduce the opioid-related adverse events from 33.3 to 8.8%. So it is a very significant decrease. So it is better to avoid opioids in these cases. The patient is safe to return to the ward only when the routine discharge criteria are met, the respiratory rate is normal, and there are no periods of hypopnea or apnea for at least 1 hour. And the arterial oxygen saturation returns to the preoperative values with or without oxygen supplementation. Enhanced recovery protocol is essential. Early mobilization is vital. Most patients should be out of the bed on the day of surgery. So it is encouraged that they should be ambulated on the same day of the surgery. And then you have to remove the calf compression devices. Patient has to be mobilized. Avoid any type of intramuscular injections because of their unpredictable pharmacokinetics in these patients. Now, summarizing this, the perioperative care of these patients, as we have seen before, in the preoperative assessment, we need a multidisciplinary assessment. You have to screen for OSA. You have to score these patients for risk stratification and plan the postoperative pathway in your preoperative period itself. In intraoperative, you should be ready for difficult intubation cases. You have to follow a protective ventilation strategy, give low tidal volume with moderate PEEP and low driving pressures, and hemodynamic monitoring may have to be applied. Post-operative, bed position should be corrected. Prolonged stay may be expected in these patients. They may need physiotherapy. Early mobilization is very essential, and CPAP and HFNC may be required in few cases. So as we all know that obesity has become an increasing problem worldwide, so all the surgeons and anesthetists will be caring for an increasing number of these patients in the foreseeable future. And thus we should be prepared to provide optimal management for these individuals. So I would like to conclude by this take-home message. Always remember this: head up, up, always, during induction, during extubation, and here in this laparoscopic cholecystectomy cases, even the surgeon will want head up. So you are safe in that regard. Correct dosing scalars of drugs have to be maintained. Use short-acting water-soluble agents. Okay. Protective ventilation strategy: less is better for lungs. Minimum sedatives and short-acting opioids should be used. Monitor the neuromuscular block depth and anesthesia depth. DVT prophylaxis and early ambulation is very much important in these cases. Optimum pain management is necessary so that the patient can be encouraged to ambulate, and also the breathing will become easier. Post-operative physiotherapy, if at all required, should be given, and these patients may require post-operative intensive care. Now, there is a Society for Obesity and Bariatric Anesthesia, which has given a single sheet guideline for anesthesia for the obese patient. So this is a one-page guideline, which I have divided into 3 pages for seeing it better on the PPT. So if the preoperative evaluation, you have these red flags, all this has been covered in the lecture, just summarizing it. So you have to consider, if these things are there, you have to consider and optimize the conditions. If no, then these patients can be taken for day case surgery. Intraoperative, as we have discussed, again, this ramp position with well-strapped bed should be there, and all our strategy should be to ensure normocapnia, and these patients' neuromuscular monitoring should be applied. Sufficient staff should be there to move the patient. Technique, as we have discussed before, all those things are mentioned here also. And these dosing also we have discussed before. Post-operatively, again, these patients should be discharged only when the discharge criteria is met, and saturation should be maintained at pre-op levels with minimal oxygen therapy, no evidence of hypoventilation. Always go for multimodal analgesia, early mobilization, and thromboprophylaxis is very important. Experienced people should be handling these patients. So I would like to conclude my lecture. Any doubts, please, it's welcome. Thank you so much.